So welcome, I'm Ken Harmon, and I'm editor-in-chief and founder of West Trade Review. Friends and supporters, colleagues and peers, lovers of art and literature, welcome. So first, let me acknowledge all of those of you that are here tonight that had a helping hand in producing our beautiful new spring edition, which we still don't have, but we will soon. Associate editor Kelly Harrison, and fiction editors Dan Ryan, Dan White, and Margaret Malone. Poetry editors Mary Sutton, Kate Burnham, Melinda Freudenberger, and Paulina Friedman. And also Matt Good, who is a contributing editor and basically just the guy who does all the little things that we need done sometimes. Thank you all for your help. And of course, to all our wonderful readers, thank you as well, because we could not do this without you. I also want to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of our social media team for all they do, especially Corey Carter Wilson. After I completed assembling the list of readers that are presenting tonight, I kept thinking about their works and the theme that connected all of them. And looking back, I think most of the works that we published last year dealt with longing and desire in some way, just how we came up with the title for this evening's reading. Even though I don't think at the time we understood that that's sort of the theme that was coming up, looking back at that now, it's really probably not all that surprising. Has there ever been a time in our lives when we longed for so much, both individually and collectively as a culture, and even as a species? 2020 deprived us of so much. Hugs, touch, companionship, any sense of normality. And politically, we were often deprived of our deepest sense of safety and security in every way imaginable. I get choked up thinking about it now still. To all of our staff, thank you for making this issue happen. We gave birth to something honest, pure, and at times, I think, achingly beautiful. I'm so proud of what we were all able to accomplish together. And of course, if it were not for our writers, there never would have been a spring issue to begin with. So thank you to all of you tonight that are reading, and to all of our viewers who are seeing this, who also submit to the journal. Thank you very, very much. Thank you for trusting us with your work and sharing with us your beautiful words. And thank all of you watching for your sponsorship, your friendship, and your invaluable commitment to literature. So tonight we have with us 4 fiction writers and 4 poets. Kayla Kavanagh is a fiction writer. She'll be reading her piece, Primrose Pink. George Choundas is reading In Thy Keyfood Shineth. Wendy Boiidograph is reading her story, Monogamy. Sophie Now, is it Now? I hope I get that right. Sophie Now is reading Anybody, her story, Anybody. And we have 4 poets. Joanna Acevedo will be reading Self-Portrait, If the Girl's on Fire. Yvonne Nguyen will be reading I Would Have Called Her Honey. And Nancy Lene Wu will be reading her poem, Naysaying the Noise. Claire Jussel will be reading To You Who Is Still Learning to Fall in Love with Her Body. All of our poets reading this evening were all published in the spring edition, and 2 of the fiction writers were published in the spring edition and 2 were published in our winter edition. So I hope you all enjoy the reading this evening. And at the conclusion, we might have a little time for questions of our writers or our staff if you'd like to do that. So our first reader this evening is Joanna Acevedo. She'll be reading from her poem, Self-Portrait, If the Girl's on Fire. Joanna is the author of a poetry collection, The Pathophysiology of Longing from Black Centipede Press, and a short story collection, Unsaid Things by Flexible Press, which is forthcoming in 2021. She received her BA in Literary Studies from the New School in 2019 and is currently studying fiction at New York University, where she's working on her MFA. Her work has been seen in Track 4, Microcosmos, Seventh Wave Magazine, and others. She is a Hospital Field 2020 interdisciplinary resident and an NYU Goldwater Fellow. prose editor at Inklet magazine, and she teaches creative writing at New York University. Please welcome Joanna Acevedo.
Hi. Okay. So I'm just going to say a few words about how this poem came to be, and then I guess I'll read it, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, so I wish I could say that I knew where this poem came from. It's part of a series which are titled Self-Portraits, all of which center on themes of loss and desire. I was thinking a lot about Joan of Arc, about sacrifice, about Emily Skaja's poem, Thank You When I'm an Axe. I basically took all of those elements, I lit a match and I shook them, and that's how this poem came to be. Okay. Self-portrait if the girl is on fire. I was a fold. I was folded in half, cleaved in two. I was Joan of Arc. I was burning. I was gasoline and matches. I was lighter fluid. I was striking a flint. I was a pact with myself. I was a suicide. I was trial by fire. I was a firing squad. I licked both of my palms for something to do. I banged on your window late at night. I kicked myself in the ankle bone. On purpose? Only God could tell me that. I was a fury. Joan said, sometimes when you want something bad enough, you'll do anything to get it. I wanted you. I would have punched out a mountain, fought a forest, if it meant I could hold you in your blue t-shirt for one more night. I was a fold. I was folded in half. I was a non-believer. The fire clicked itself off. Someone had turned off the darkness. Now, can you believe that I was dangerous? I was unruly. I took all the bullets from the guns and made a soup. I was a feast. I was feasting. Joan said, sometimes burn scars are the only way to prove that you were really there. I made my mark. The moonlight made the flames look holy. Do you know where you are yet? I was a fire. I wasn't afraid. I was firing. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. So up next, Dan is going to introduce our next reader, Sophie, who'll be reading her story, Anybody?
Thanks, Ken. Okay, so Sophie now is a fiction MFA candidate at the University of New Orleans. She has written for food media publications and has work published or forthcoming in Things Created by People, Eat, Darling, Eat, and Tilted House Review. She is a proud Angelino and recent New Orleans transplant. Our associate fiction editor, Margaret Malone, worked with Sophie on edits for this piece. She could not be here tonight, but she wrote a brief intro that I will read in her stead. Sophie's story immediately grabbed our attention. The piece is rampant with dark humor and inhabited by characters fumbling towards and away from their best selves, like the tide. It is a pleasure to share part of the story, to hear her share part of the story here with you today, and please welcome Sophie now.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here, and I'm just going to read the first few pages of Anybody. Anybody. When I saw Elijah's ex-wife being rolled down the ER hallway, my hand jumped to my phone. Do you know your ex-wife is here? Looks like a broken foot, I wanted to text him. I suppose to have some immediate stake in the drama. Obviously, I didn't do that. I had stopped at the vending machine on the way to the room the patient actor program was working out of today. The 50 cents in change from my protein bar was enough for half a load of laundry. I had another week until my paychecks came in and maybe 2 more days of clean underwear. The program is designed for UCLA medical school students to practice empathy and develop understanding, the director told me during my interview a few weeks ago. His air was theatrically confident, and he had a growing bald spot, as if it was his only Achilles heel. For maximum impact, he said, our patients not only have the life-threatening ailment they're being admitted for, but another unrelated issue that the doctors might find challenging to work with, a disability or a difficult life circumstance, for example. Remember, Mika, if you sign up to be a patient actor, you must behave badly. It wasn't a lot of money, but it would cover the bills my Venice barista job couldn't, and give me something to do while I thought about what to do. Last week, I was a Hungarian refugee with limited English and a shooting pain in my appendix. The week before that, I was a 60-year-old agoraphobic suffering from vertigo. The orderly wheeled Elijah's ex-wife into a small waiting room reserved for patients. There she was in the second row, in a tennis skirt and an ankle bandage. Out in the Venice sun where I usually saw her, she was dewy and vaguely 30. Here, worry lines plagued her face, and her hair was greased with sweat. I wanted to find flaws in her. I wanted her to look mean, like a fallen shrew, but she just looked like a woman. She looked tired. Her head was bent over her phone, and then she lifted her head up and slung it back onto the chair. She closed her eyes as she put her phone to her ear. "Elijah," she said, "are you at the restaurant? I need a favor." The lisp in her voice was unmistakable, a flaw that only made her more endearing. The chair next to hers was empty, like it was waiting for Elijah's body to fill it. She opened her eyes, lifted her head back, and caught me staring. "Sorry," I said, and kept walking down the hall, my quarters sweaty in my palms. For the past few weeks, Elijah had not texted me, and I was beginning to despair. I didn't like that I was despairing because I felt it gave him power, which I had been trying very hard to hold on to ever since I started sleeping with him 3 months ago. At 39, he was 15 years older than me. He also owned the restaurant next door to the cafe where I worked on Rose. I had never been with someone who had once been married. I didn't know what to make of it, especially when she, the ex-wife, was always in the peripheral. Because the restaurants on Rose were always in each other's figurative business, and because his ex-wife was still part owner of the restaurant, we promised not to tell anyone. Looking back, I was the only one who had promised not to tell, and I just assumed he wouldn't. I liked that his dog would run to me at the patio of his restaurant, run and recognize me and lick my fingers. I liked aligning my skin with his, even though I never wrapped my whole body around him, afraid to disturb a boundary I imagined he had set. For something so casual, it was frightening to think I might lose it. I didn't know why. "Morning," I said to the director, who was busy on a laptop as I entered the hospital room. Most of the medical students had already arrived, taking seats in 2 short rows of set-up chairs. I stepped closer to the director. I still wasn't sure if we called him that because he directed the program or because he directed our acting. "I was wondering if you knew anything about my direct deposit," I said. "It hasn't come through yet." His eyes lingered on his laptop before they swiveled over to me. "Oh, well, sometimes these things take time. You'll have to ask Lydia in HR. He seemed to sense my agitation. "Which ailment do you want this week?" "Mika's choice." Was all I could say, caught off guard. There were so many possibilities. "Your character is 42 years old, name's Nadia Fitzgerald," the director said. "I'm thinking severe trauma injury or something internal, like a stomach tumor." "Trauma injury," I said immediately. "Maybe my foot got mauled." "Great, what else?" She's an athlete, can never play again." "Sure, emotional arc, I like it. Maybe she's famous, a very high profile client." "All right, guys," he called to the rest of the room. "Let's get started." He beckoned at 2 of the students in the front row, Dev and Sandra, who had been assigned this week's case. Dev had eyebrows that perpetually ticked upwards, and Sandra had perfect skin with a mouth I could only describe as fair, like an equal sign. I hopped onto the exam table, the paper crinkling underneath my weight. The director zeroed in on them. "Okay, guys, amputation is on the table, but you aren't yet sure if it's the best course of action to take. How can you relay this without causing panic in the patient?" He raised his hands up like he was tossing them a thoughtful, upbeat question, and slipped into a chair in the back of the room. Dev started out soft. "You've been through a lot." "Yes," was all I could think to say. I felt awkward. As I looked down at my feet, I couldn't help imagining I was in the same tennis skirt as Elijah's ex-wife. I had perhaps made a huge mistake taking her on. And I'll stop right there.
Wonderful, Sophie. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
So up next we have Yvonne Nguyen, and she'll be introduced by our Associate Poetry Editor, Paulina Friedman.
Thanks, Ken. Yvonne is a recent graduate of the University of Virginia and currently teaches English language arts in Richmond, Virginia. Recently, her poem, which she's going to read for us tonight, I Would Have Called Her Honey, was shortlisted for the Brain Mill Press Poetry Month Award. Other works of hers can be read in the Roadrunner Review, Call Me Brackets, Down in the Dirt, Bewildering Stories, Gnosko Literary Magazine, Yes Poetry, and Plain Songs. Her work has also been nominated for the Best of the Net Award and the 2020 Pushcart Prize.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. My name is Yvonne Nguyen. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I wrote this poem that I'm going to read today a little over a year ago now, so last April. After months of not writing anything, I challenged myself to write a poem a day. We were still kind of in the throes of lockdown, and I think I felt this pressure to do something with that time or to create something with that time. And I was looking for inspiration anywhere, just an image or an idea. I looked down, I saw a hair tie on my wrist, and I just committed to that. And that's where this poem came from. It was the first poem of my little challenge, and it was the one that made writing the rest of the poems a little bit less intimidating. So I hope you guys enjoy. I would have called her honey. She was blonde adjacent, quasi-brunette, that sun-ripened syrup hue that made my mouth salty, not curly, just playful, like the top of a soft serve ice cream cone. For that wheat field, molasses river, I sacrificed the last hairband around my wrist, the one I hadn't lost in 3 weeks because she probably needed it to concentrate on her trig test, or to play goalie in handball, or to tie off her unfinished bag of pretzels. I didn't even mind when I saw her hold it between her teeth. I just held my breath, watching to see if the thinning elastic would hold against her 4-twist ponytail. Even now, even all these years since the last time I put my hair in a high ponytail or tried to find one girl's exact shade in the hair dye aisle of a CVS just to know its name, I still wear that indented mark on my wrist, that puckered phantom bracelet, and regret the baby hairs falling out onto the nape of her neck, the ones I couldn't help catch. Thank you, guys.
It's so beautiful. Thank you so much. So up next, we have Wendy Boiidograph, who will be reading her story from her story, Monogamy, and she'll be introduced by our fiction editor, Dan White.
Thank you again. Okay. Wendy Boidigraph's fiction, poems, and essays have been included in the Illinois Review, Another Chicago Magazine, the Journal of Compressed Creative Arts, Noon, and elsewhere. Originally from Ontario, Canada, she now lives in Michigan. Monogamy was one of my personal favorite pieces that we accepted over the past year. It was immediately compelling and one that several members on our fiction team responded to right away. It is in a language-driven focus on the interiority of a woman in a coffee shop. Wendy manages to background the turmoil of her character's external life behind her surprisingly calm and thoroughly compelling inner mind. Unabashed in its confrontation of the contemplation of adultery, our protagonist's thoughts carry us along swiftly and surely to its delicate, thought-provoking ending. Please welcome Wendy Boiidograph.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thank you everyone for having me here. Monogamy, I really like to write at home where it's very quiet, if I can get it quiet. And this was a challenge to me because I wrote this first draft in a coffee shop. So I could really get the setting there. And I love listening into people, of course. I'm that person who's always pretending to pay attention to something else, but I'm listening to your conversations. So, monogamy. The man sits across from me in the leather coffee shop chair, tall, lanky, something European about his mouth, the way it curves down and then up at the edges. You know he has an accent. Very dark hair, medium pale skin, with a bit of scruff around the chin. The right kind of jeans, snug but not tight. He is wearing plaid, and that's off-putting. A plaid shirt is casual day default or else lumberjack. It never works. Plaid sheets, maybe. I could sleep on plaid sheets if they weren't mine. My husband is having an affair. Ongoing encounter might be a better word because it's not about love. This time he's gone every Thursday and Monday night, all night. In the past, it's been more sporadic. Something's different this time. It's not about love, though. We are as together as ever. I think he wants me to acknowledge that I know, that he's giving all of the evidence I need to confront him with his beliefs versus my beliefs, and yet I won't. He'll never come out and say it. That's not his way. But he's showing me that I've got an option here, that he's being stupid, so I'll say something, do something, but I can't, won't. He has his headphones on, the man across from me, the big ones with the sound blocking qualities that would make me oblivious enough to sing out loud, except the barista would hear me, and the line of people waiting for their pre-ordered coffees and the people already at tables, unwrapping the waxed paper wrappings of pastry and breakfast muffins. The man is not listening to music. He's not doing any of the head nodding or swaying, no lip syncing or involuntary air drums. Chinari says I need to find someone too. A Tuesday and Wednesday man, or at least a fling, or even a one-night stand. A one-night stand would help me see it all more clearly. Show me how this marriage was the right one after all. Show me that this is how people make it to the golden anniversary, not by looking the other way, but by experiencing the buffet of sexual partners that are out there. It's so 50s, Chinari says. You at home, him doing whatever he pleases. I remind her I'm not at home. I litigate fair housing law every day. I don't want to do the same in my marriage. He's listening to something intensely, the man is. Concentration lines pucker around his eyes, on his forehead, as if he can see into what he hears. His shoes, white-soled, black-topped, round grommets shining, rest flat-footed on the ground. His toes point inward, slightly inward. This is unusual. Isn't it unusual? All I know is Dom, whose toes skew outward. We are a good match, Dom and I. We fit. We like the small city theater and the annual month in Hawke's Bay, the house with the perfect mesh of his and my styles. On my own, I'd be too spare, too wide open space. He finds the unique pieces, the knickknacks. Without me, he'd be a clutter maven, but together it works. It makes the place look more like ours, less house beautiful. The man shifts forward, adjusts the laptop on his lap, his knees jutting out into the aisle between us. He sips his coffee, his eyes never wavering from the screen. It isn't a question of leaving. It is a contest of sustaining. I had a vision of us, two old, wrinkled, gray, shortened people, knowing each other, taking care of each other. What did sexual beliefs matter in that scenario? We'd have moved past. We'd have made it through all of that, and we'd still know each other. We'd know perfectly what each other needed, wanted, what would make the old age arthritis and endless appointments bearable. We'd have all the history, all the stuff that a second or third marriage couldn't have experienced. It's something we both wanted. The thrill of the new never lasted long. The man leans into my space. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Love that story. By the way, you can see Wendy's story online on our website under exclusives. It's from the winter edition. So up next we have Nancy Lene Wu, who'll be reading from her poem, Naysaying the Noise. Nancy Lene Wu spends her free time hitching a ride to the other side of maybe. She is an MFA candidate at Antioch University, the recipient of fellowships from PEN America, Arts Council for Long Beach, and Idlewild Writers Week, and the author of 2 chapbooks. You'll find her cavorting around Long Beach, California, and online you can find her at nancylenewu.com. Please welcome Nancy Lene Wu.
Hi, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. So This poem came about last year at the tail end of the Trump era, right before the election, when I was all nerves and, like many of us, struggling to deal. And I found that I needed a way to feed my hope over my fear. And so I found that by reconnecting with my love for nature, camping, hiking, and I am now writing a critical paper in my MFA program literally today about hope punk, which is the genre that I feel I gravitate so much towards. Briefly, it's just that hope is the strongest force that we need right now in all of our collective crises. So this is Naysaying the Noise. I haven't found one thing the stars aren't a cure for. Hand me my mountain bag full of ripe plums plummeting from flower bud to boiling pot to jam jar. I count the miles back out to Chaparral, heaving under the weight of my need to see everything and to be seen, seeing it. Would I feel less wanderlust if I could scrub off the dead glory of a nation obsessed with itself? Follow me to a hot spring tucked away behind some tall grass. Would you like that? I accelerate out to the wilderness, forgetting what I'm supposed to be forgetting, to get absolutely lost in the ridiculous brilliance of an acorn. I have everything I could ever want. And still, I wonder how far the human race will go for a profit, whether we will ever find another home like this one. Its miraculous blue, its hilarious oxygen. Every cat meme is a metaphor for the existential threat du jour. Somewhere, a teenage girl thinks her ears are too big. All we have is our experience. Just ask the Joshua trees, prophets of beauty, survival, and the hawking jays, what I wouldn't even call song. I want to give them to you, their pointy heads and their blue breasts flashing. Everyone deserves to follow the sky. What illusion am I breaking when I say no to the noise? I won't entertain hatred, refuse to listen to a man on the news spitting globs of fear in a language no oriole, no quail, no midnight bat, no creosote bush, no dire wolf, no waxing moon understands. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It's an amazing poem. So up next we have George Choundas, who will be reading from his story In Thy Kifu Shineth, and he'll be introduced by our fiction editor, Dan White.
Thank you again, Ken. Okay. George Choundas's fiction and nonfiction have appeared in over 50 publications, including The Best Small Fictions, Alaska Quarterly Review, Boulevard, Harvard Review, The Southern Review, and Subtropics. His story collection, The Making Sense of Things, FC2, was awarded the Ronald Skuknik Innovative Fiction Prize, as well as shortlisted for the Robert C. Jones Prize for Short Prose, the St. Lawrence Book Award for Fiction, and a Catherine Ann Porter Prize in Short Fiction. He is a winner of the New Millennium Award for Fiction, a former FBI agent, and half Cuban, half Greek. Yet in Thy Kifu Shineth was the first story that we accepted as a new fiction team, and was a particular favorite of our former fiction editor, Dan Ryan. An inventive, poignant piece, it represented a key moment in the direction we would eventually take West Rate Review in, one that is not hesitant to explore new boundaries in form and subject matter. It is a swift and relentless story, one that turns both funny and quite sad, and comments fully upon a rarely explored side of humanity. Please welcome George Shundus.
Thanks, Dan. That was a really nice intro. And I have to say that a really important part of the story, maybe more important than many other stories that I've worked with editors on, is the editorial process. You know, when I worked with Dan Ryan on the story, there were some great insights that made the story much better than the one I submitted to you all. And for that, I'm grateful. And just a little word about the story itself. It comes from a supermarket actually called Key Food in the little town that I live in Pleasantville, New York. And the Key Food is interesting at all only because I'm not used to small towns. This is the first one I've lived in. And so I took Key Food for granted as sort of this, you know, embassy of big cityness, you know, the anonymous chain that you can just take for granted. And I quickly learned that wasn't the case, that Key Food was open for business when there was 8 inches of snow on the ground and nowhere else was open, and the volunteer fire department wasn't staffed, but yet because they made a point of hiring people who could walk, drive and walk to the store, that they could always staff Key Food. And I also learned that you know, when you're a preteen or a young teen at Key Food, the second you walk in the store, you're essentially assigned your own security person, because they know very well that there's going to be bags of candy juggled and condoms placed in elderly ladies' baskets, and so they've got your eye on you. But at some point, Key Food's like a venue for a rite of passage, because you'll walk in and you'll buy turkey bacon and avocado because you want to replicate a recipe that you've seen on social media, because now you're 15. And now you're a customer, and they know the difference, and they know these kids personally. So I thought to myself, they're a part of the community sort of externally, which is a surprise, but I wonder what the community is inside the supermarket. And this story was sort of a takeoff on that. 2 years I was at Scott Lee's Key Food, register and restocking the Olive Bar. Olive Bar was my realm. There was the guy they called Mr. He lived on the bench outside Playa Bowls and showed off his phone, big tap typing, so everybody saw he had a phone, except it was a hand mirror. The high schoolers called him Mr. Mister and sat on the bench and posted photos with him, because high schoolers are asswipes. Mr. liked to come in the supermarket and pick things out and put them in his cart, very careful. What he did not like is paying. When he got to register, he'd just stand there looking down, his hands on the cart. He wouldn't put anything on the belt. He wouldn't answer when you said, "You going to pay for these?" And then, "You have to pay for these." And then, "They're gonna make you leave if you don't pay for these." But he'd look up every time, which is why you thought he'd answer, but he never did. And he'd look down again as soon as you finished talking. And finally, after you realized you had to stop saying things, or else he'd stay and keep looking up and watching your face, you did what he did, just stand there, and he'd turn and leave. People said he was crazy. I say people are full of shit. Like paying is their favorite. Hakeem, the day manager, never let him near register. They said Hakeem got the job because he was married to the owner's daughter. And when she moved out, the daughter told her father to fire him. And Scott Lee said, "You find somebody who's good, I'll fire him." Scott Lee and the daughter didn't talk after that, is what they said. Hakeem always spotted Mr. on the way in or latest by aisle 3. Mr. was easy to spot because when he got to the end of an aisle, he pulled this 33-point turn to haul himself around and went up the other side of the same aisle. So basically, he was easy to catch because he was thorough. The only times Mr. made it to register, Hakeem was out, and it was Laura on point, and Laura was busy talking grandkids. So that Christmas time, we were all getting in the spirit. Barbara from Delhi put up decorations. There was a food drive barrel near the exit. Our Salvation Army was bell ringing and singing carols like opera, and nobody knew if she was being funny or just trying hard. And the new stock boy spotted Mr. coming in. I already saw Mr. that morning when I was walking from the bus. The high schoolers, extreme asswipes, now they were pretending to take photos with the hand mirror. Laura was at register, and the new stock boy gave her a heads up, all whispery and side-eyed like Her Majesty's shipboard service. Meanwhile, Mr. was doing his snake with a sunstroke thing up and down the aisles, By the time he made it to organics, Hakeem was at register too. Laura, seeing Hakeem, started to say, I know, but Hakeem put up a hand all serious. A few minutes later, Mr. brought his items to register, and Laura scanned and bagged and told him a total. Mr. said, I don't have the money. It was the first time any of us heard Mr. speak. Maybe it was because the two of them there at register looking at him. Then one of them, because Laura just looked down. Hakeem just said, Merry Christmas. Mr. pushed his cart away. He was moving slow enough that the cart tugged and veered to the right every couple of feet. Almost out the door, he stopped. He lifted the 2 bags out of the cart. The new stock boy, who was like shadowing him, did a pro wrestler thing with his shoulders like he was going to keep him from tossing the bags on the floor. But Mr. ignored him. Mr. turned the opposite way, away from the stock boy toward the wall, toward the food drive barrel. He set the bags down inside the barrel, very careful. Nobody said anything for a long time after he left. Then the stock boy said, well, shit. Laura, bless her, she said, it's Christmas, watch your fucking mouth. Thanks.
Thank you so much, George. Up next, we have Claire Jussel, who'll be reading from her poem, To You Who Is Still Learning to Love Her Body, and she'll be introduced by our associate poetry editor, Paulina Friedman.
Thanks, Ken. Claire is an emerging poet, writer, and artist from Boise, Idaho. She graduated from St. Olaf College in 2019 with degrees in English and history. Her work has also appeared in The Quarry. She currently resides in Minnesota and is a bookseller at Wild Rumpus Books in Minneapolis.
Hi, thank you. So this poem emerged during last summer after reading a poem by Ellen Bass called Ode to Fat, which is a very gorgeous poem. And after I encountered that poem, I kind of came to the realization that, oh, I never write about the body. And that seemed to be a subject area that was, out of my comfort zone. And I started thinking, well, maybe I want to or need to try to be bold and tackle that area. So at the same time, it was summer and I was enjoying the bounty of summer fruit that season. And that imagery of the fruit kind of became an entry point into that more vulnerable subject matter and into this poem, which is ultimately about self-love and appreciation for the physical part of the self. And I realized after writing it, it was also a bit about change and accepting change and embracing change as part of embracing the self. So, to you, who is still learning to fall in love with her body and is leaning over the kitchen sink eating a nectarine. You didn't always like fruit, but here you are, back arching involuntarily at the first bite of that bright, blemished thing. Do you remember what your mother told you about detecting ripeness? That the best things are both firm and soft and lightly fragrant. Say the same for yourself, to the ever-present softness of your belly, when summer hills draw you lean, and when the pale flesh rises back, look how the strong domed stomach holds you up. Have you seen those misshapen fruits kept from market? Lemons with curling ram horns, triple wide strawberries, topographically dynamic apples, all good fruit, though they are coiled and curved and lumpy. Love is not far off, my pigeon-breasted, rib-flared, spine-swayed deer, who a year ago would have imagined you, with nectarine syrup dripping from coated fingertips, fleshy juice caught in the corners of your lips, nippling down to that slippery pit. Thank you.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. So up next, we have our final reader, Kayla Kavanagh, who'll be reading from her story, Primrose Pink, which was one of my favorite stories from the entire spring issue, honestly. And she'll be introduced by our fiction editor, Dan White.
Thank you, Ken. Kayla Kavanagh is an MFA student at the University of South Florida. Her work has previously appeared in the Little Pazuant Review and Body Without Organs. Margaret Malone worked with Kayla on the edits for this story as well, and I will read the short intro that she has written. Kayla's story was one of the first we accepted for the print journal. We were captivated by its language and voice, and most significantly by the narrator's ability to communicate a struggle she didn't quite know how to find her way out of. Something familiar to all of us. We're so happy to have you here today to read an excerpt of this wonderful piece. So please welcome Kayla Kavanagh.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to read the first half of my story, which is about a closeted lesbian who marries a man. Being numb on your wedding night, being sweaty and iridescent and satisfied, but also a bit frosty, a part of you always frozen, even on this night of nights, a warm breeze blowing through the gauzy curtains in this cottage by the sea. Beside you, a man you've managed to marry, asleep and also satisfied, the sheets between you sticky from the act of all your lovemaking. Beyond the window, Martha's Vineyard, the appeal having been that you could honeymoon in the same place where you held the reception. Every in-law is to respectfully shuffle onto tomorrow morning's first ferry, leaving you alone to a lover in an island, to frigid waves pulsing up the rocky shore. You've arrived at the end of a pale summer. In the morning, a sunrise walk before he wakes. Two blonde beach runners ahead of you, their braided ponytails swinging in unison. You focus on their calves. Years ago, you trained your eyes not to stray from calves. Anything above them, a rubber band snap, a petite explosion. When the runners are out of sight, you turn around in the damp sand, taking care to trace only your own footprints on the way back to the cottage. Inside, your husband will be at the stovetop with an egg whisk and an iPhone, smearing bacon grease onto his screen already cluttered with emails. He will promptly ignore all of this once you walk in. Craig is a man of gangly limbs and goofy grins, raised on Vermont grass stains and scented candle-scented pieces. And God, does he love you. He looks like the happiest man in Massachusetts, standing there with his arms outstretched, and as he wraps them around you, he says as much. He says, "I'm the happiest man in Massachusetts." With the joy that bubbles up in your throat comes always that shaky relief, the fundamental knowledge that you love him too, which must count for something, perhaps even everything. It began when you were too young to understand, in 3rd grade when Katie from across the street rescued you from the treehouse, a knight in tinfoil armor saving a princess in a plastic crown. She grasped your waist going down the yellow slide and you felt a tickle at the base of your stomach, butterflies. You often caught belly butterflies going down the yellow slide. You grew up with a mother who served her opinions on a dinner plate. Don't like it, don't eat. That night at the kitchen table, she surveyed Katie's chinked armor and your gauzy Rapunzel dress disapprovingly and asked, "Why does one of you need to be the man?" Which, when you considered it later, in the desperate crossroads of your 20s, struck you as an excellent question. The Rapunzel game was your favorite, but Katie didn't enjoy it as much as you did. Didn't enjoy it much at all when in 5th grade you suggested the prince and princess should, for the sake of plot, pretend to kiss with a sheet of paper between their lips. And you didn't particularly enjoy the 6th grade when Katie made new friends and began ignoring you altogether. Craig has convinced you to move to San Francisco, or actually, he has convinced your mother. She is a lifelong New Englander, but he is a top tech recruit in Silicon Valley, so she will rent a condo on the West Coast, not that you ever expressly invited her. You're a journalist who can work from anywhere, a fact you suspect has largely been taken for granted. You spend the week after the honeymoon at your mother's house, packing a U-Haul that will be driven cross-country by a man she hired online. Your excommunicated preschool teaching father who lives across town is not, apparently, a more trustworthy option. Craig has always loved the electric blue walls of your childhood bedroom. Whenever he stays for a weekend or a holiday, he announces he's never seen a room glow like that before. He likes to peel back layers of your cluttered corkboard, college parking stickers and high school prom tickets giving way to Girl Scout badges, Valentine's Day daddy-daughter dance photos. He asks for the name of the boy you went to senior prom with, and for an alarming moment you can't remember, only that it felt like you were playing dress up. On the way to the airport, he offhandedly remarks how he will miss those blue walls, so strange and special, and your mother settles into the story of how you begged her to paint them in high school. It broke her heart that you wanted to cover the soft primrose shade she'd chosen so carefully during pregnancy, But you were insistent, she recalls, stamping your feet and pleading, only to realize later that you preferred the pink after all. You hate the way she tells the story, but it is mostly true. The blue walls shone so brightly in the dark that you couldn't sleep for a week, enveloped in a new, unfamiliar color and the guilt that you'd gone against your mother's wishes to get it. Over dinner one evening, you apologized. She had been right. Blue did not belong in the bedroom. You can't forget the delicious relief that accompanied your confession, the ease with which the two of you finished your meal, that unclenching in your stomach worth far more than anything else you might one day feel. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kayla. So we have a few minutes if anyone would like to ask questions of any of the readers this evening.
I have one, if no one else does. Kayla, I think one of the things that was so interesting when we first got your story is that it's in the second person, which somewhat famously around West Rate of You is typically not something that I gravitate towards as a reader or an editor, but I think in your story it's so perfect. So I'm just wondering if you maybe could speak for just briefly about kind of a little bit of the process of that, and with second person, the first when you first conceived of the story, was second person right away what you thought would be the best point of view, or did you arrive at that after a while and kind of realizing what the story needed, or kind of how did that go? Because it's so rarely used so well. I think second person here, it's just absolutely perfect.
Thanks. I like to use second person when I need to create like some psychic distance between myself and the narrator. So I think putting it in second person versus first person kind of allowed me to explore that character's struggles in a way I wouldn't have been able to do in first person.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else have any questions or comments even? It's fine.
I have an open question to everyone. It's always at every reading somebody asks about your process, but I'd like to focus specifically on revision. You've got the first draft done, whether it's a poem, a story. Anybody want to chime in about how you go about revising? I think less polishing, but more of the, getting everything in the right place.
I'll jump in real quick. I think for me, I have to put it away for a long time and like let it percolate, and also have people read it, of course. But then I feel like giving some space from it lets me see what I was really trying to say with it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Sophie. I and put it away so long that you almost don't recognize the piece, because otherwise it's so easy to fall into that trap of the little polishes, Ellie, that you were suggesting you were not as interested in, because we all know those come pretty easy, and the bigger revisions are the harder ones. So I completely, it almost has to be like an alien work to do the big changes.
Yeah,
Sure.
what I've been doing recently is a lot of ripping. I mean, I hate this phrase, like in workshops, like rip your poem apart. I'm like, let's be gentle and nurture like a seed. But anyway, I have actually been like actually dismantling my poems and taking, being less attached, taking lines, rearranging them. I have a whole document of like fresh random lines, and so I've been doing a lot of mishmashing and like remixing, and that's been really fun right now.
I definitely relate to that as well. And I found that sometimes there are just lines in my poems that I love and I love so much, but just don't fit in the piece. And I have such a hard time letting go of them. So I will take them and tuck them away somewhere else and try to rehome them when I can into another poem, or sometimes create an entire separate poem just for that one line.
I also get very attached sometimes to certain pieces of the poem that I like, but they're not like, it's not working there really. So one revision technique that I learned from an instructor was to like do your draft, do your brainstorm, and then flip the page or open a new document if you're on the computer and just try to rewrite or get back down to the core ideas. And like, if that certain part isn't coming back, like maybe it's not really adding anything. So that's something that in this poem specifically, I had to do a few drafts of. I didn't have the time to set it away for a long time because it was for a workshop I was writing it for, but just trying to turn the page and like take a breath and come back to it and like kind of create a false sense of like temporal distance by just trying to turn the page and give it a fresh start and seeing what stuck and what new things emerged.
Georgia, I have a question
Yeah.
for you. Your piece that we published was, I think, the shortest piece of fiction that we published last year. What do you find particularly challenging about a smaller piece like that? And how long did you work on it in revision?
Months for sure in terms of revision, months, and not, you know, not always would it be the only piece I'd work on a given day, but yeah, I mean, maybe, yeah, probably more than a year from the time I started it to the time I sent it in. And I think interestingly, I think process is definitely challenging for a short piece, but I really do think the short piece is the detonator that really inflames people's idiosyncratic preferences about what they want to see in short fiction. And so, like, you send somebody a 2-pager that where characterization really isn't the point, and they'll throw up their hands in disgust and say, well, there's no characterization in this piece. And so, so in that sense, I think these really short pieces are have built-in risk, because they provoke in people really sharp reactions. Short fiction for me is, I mean, like, really short pieces like this are super fun for me. I don't find them challenging, except when I try to grapple seriously with someone who says there's no substance, there's nothing at stake. That, you know, then that's a matter of just disciplining yourself into hearing them out, thinking clearly about whether that's whether stake is necessarily something you want in that piece, and if so, then doing that revision. But yeah, I think appealing to that anonymous third person in your head is a big trap and goal when it comes to these smaller pieces. Yeah.
I have one for Nancy. It's unrelated to what's being discussed now, but I just wondered, hearing her poem, you're talking about returning to nature and kind of transcending all of that human waste. And are you a fan, like your literary influences? Do you read like the transcendentalist poets or writers like Edward Abbey, these people who made these careers out of returning to nature and kind of embodying that essence and leaving, like I said, the human waste? Or do you read any of that? Were there any of those influences?
So I'll show off my lack of large readership. So I cannot say I have intentionally read the Transcendentalists. I mean, in high school, like Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I've been told Whitman. My work is Whitman-esque, but I've never really actually just ordered a book of Whitman's poems. Like, I'm so not well read. I've been thinking about how you can be part of a poetic tradition and not really have conscious awareness too much of that tradition. I find it very interesting. Maybe an argument for some transcendental mystic, you know, waves going on. But what I will say is that while I access a transcendent state, I think to get into the way of writing poems for me, I actually feel very grounded. And from this time I wrote that poem, I have completed a climate activism training. So I'm actually channeling a lot of that transcendence. Like, it's not so much escapism, I would say, as channeling it into real world action, because I do very strongly believe that we all, every single person on this planet, if we eat food, drink water, and eliminate, need to understand how our global processes of the world are connected. So I'm actually don't feel so much like, oh, let's just escape to nature, because there is not, I mean, we're destroying nature. So writing right now is very different from writing, you know, in the era of pre-industry. So that will be my long-winded answer on how I relate, I suppose, to the transcendentalists. As a practice, yes, you know, love it.
That's a great point. I really love the poem. I thought it was great. I definitely felt that, especially at that time, the time at which you said you wrote it. I was feeling very similarly. So that really stood out. definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then we'll just wrap it up. So again, I'd like to thank all of our staff for all their hard work this year and their dedication and their passion. The spring 2021 edition is something I think that we can all be proud of. And again, it'll probably arrive in a few more weeks, it looks like. To the writers that presented this evening, thank you so very, very much from the bottom of my heart for sharing your work and for supporting our literary community. And to all of you watching now, thank you for your sponsorship, your friendship, and your invaluable commitment to literature. And if you don't already, please follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, and subscribe to our monthly newsletter for updates about the work that we do at West Trade Review. You'll find all the info you need to connect with us on our website, westtradereview.com. Thank you again for all of you for joining us, and have a good evening.